Thank you for joining us, and welcome to the talk and discussion centered on the book launch of Radiation and Revolution by theorist, activist, and translator Sabu Kohso. I am Jason Waite, a curator and PhD researcher at the Ruskin School of Art, University of Oxford. I am in Oxford, sitting in a room wearing a white collared shirt, glasses, with auburn and gray medium-length hair parted to the left. Behind me is drawn white window shade, a cream-colored curtain with a rhododendron hanging over my left shoulder and part of a fern visible to the right. Sabu Kohso is in New York City, in a room surrounded by bookshelves, wearing a black turtleneck shirt and silver glasses with short-cropped dark hair. I am honored to be hosting Sabu Kohso today, and I will give about a 10-minute introduction before Sabu will be speaking for roughly 30 to 40 minutes, and then we'll have a discussion before opening the floor to questions. Feel free to put your questions in the chat box at any time during the event, and I will ask as many of them to Sabu as time permits. As a preface to today's talk, please feel free not to be fixed to the screen for the next roughly 90 minutes. And instead, we invite you to listen to the talk while undertaking any form of care, cooking, eating, doing the dishes, folding laundry, cleaning, childcare, or elder care. Integrating this talk within your everyday social reproduction can be a small form of enacting what Sabu calls life is struggle, as we work to sustain our lives and maintain practices of solidarity and collective affinity. I would like to take a moment to acknowledge the land of the host organization on which we speak. This event is hosted by Christ Church College in Oxford, an institution founded on the forcibly displaced Jewish quarter of the city, of which at least 10 buildings were taken without compensation. The college was developed with a yet unknown amount of funds from human chattel slavery. To the introduction. Sabu Kohso is an activist, theorist, translator based in New York City for decades, shuttling back and forth between Japan, the US, and elsewhere. He embodies a Rosetta Stone of critical debates and radical histories of Japan and elsewhere, sharing them with the English-speaking world and beyond, and at the same time, developing the current of radical political thought in North America and Europe, and bringing that back to Japan. His early formation in the radical milieu and protests in Tokyo in the 1970s is expanded upon in his book and has informed other planetary social movements. An example of which was the Occupy movement, which Sabu participated in and contributed to in Zuccotti Park in New York City in 2011. Not only undertaking the work on the ground, but after the occupation, Sabu has been integral in the longue durée of criticizing, theorizing, and carrying forward the social and political dynamics and methodologies at play in Occupy through interpersonal engagements worldwide. This critical engagement extends to and through the start of the Fukushima nuclear disaster on March 11th, 2011. That is now entering its 10th year in 2021. The book Radiation and Revolution continues this practice in its pages as a durable form of knowledge that we can carry forth, which Sabu will generously unpack with us today. My own relation with Sabu's important work stems from my engagement with Fukushima as a curator living in New York, interested in the ongoing aftermath of catastrophe of neoliberal capitalism and its response, which have produced modes of prefigurative practices centered on agency, reparation, and care, which undergird a new direction for culture. In 2012, through mutual friends, I met the Tokyo-based artist collective Chimpan, who had previously worked in Fukushima and had the desire to develop a long-term project there. I came to Japan for the first time in March 2013, and within 24 hours of arriving, was on the road heading north to Fukushima from Tokyo. The government had allowed public access to a road famous for its cherry blossoms in the forcibly evacuated town of Futaba, near the melted down nuclear power plant, Fukushima, near the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power station. Despite media depictions the day before announcing the road as open, showing journalists wandering around taking photos of the tree, when we approached the area, there was no one for kilometers. And when we finally reached the street with cherry blossoms in full bloom, there was a sign on the trees that read, "In this area, the radiation level is high. When you view the cherry blossoms, please stay inside your car." As I was already afraid of nuclear fallout, despite not knowing much about the specifics of radiation, this disjointed invitation by the government to come to the area, but then reiterate its danger and ask that we stay in our vehicles, was an action that read counter to the tradition of hanami, picnics of sharing food and drink under the trees, and seemed to heighten sense of distance and mistrust in the governmental practices. Despite this fear and disorientation, learning more about the durational disaster and the community's response to it seemed to hold a wealth of knowledge for others facing durational and displacing disasters due to such forces as climate change. Myself, along with Chimpam, curator Kenji Kubota, and artists Eva and Franco Mates, formed the collective Don't Follow the Wind and set about to work with the displaced residents and 12 artists, including Meru Koizumi, Trevor Paglin, Ai Weiwei, and Kota Takeuchi, to develop an exhibition inside the 337 square kilometer Fukushima exclusion zone. The project opened in 2015, but still can't be seen as the area is closed to the public. It was on this journey that I first found Sabu Kohso's writings. Initially, the book Fukushima Monomore, that came out in 2011, a volume he co-wrote with Silvia Federici and others. It brought to bear a critical theoretical analysis that helped to situate Fukushima in a larger framework and dismantled this disjointed dissonance within the disaster by providing a clarifying context. The title of his own contribution to that book, Fangs Hiding in the Green, put into words the terror that I felt on that initial trip and in many following trips in and around the zone. Sabu's writings have been published in Efflux Journal, Boundary 2, Inter-Asian Cultural Studies, and elsewhere, providing an invaluable cipher to the nuclear disaster and its place in the larger matrix that undergird the nation state and corporate interest, which Sabu has called nuclear capitalism. Always a sharp and generous thinker, Sabu last came to Oxford in 2018 for the conference Art in the Time of Catastrophe, held by the Ruskin in Christchurch, co-organized with the Mori Museum of Art. And with that, I would like to warmly welcome him virtually back here and turn it over to Sabu Kohso.
Yeah. Is it, can I start now or wait a little bit? Or? Yeah.
Hi, Sabu. Yes, apologies.
Is it shifted to my, yeah, okay. Okay. Thank you very much, Jason, for a very kind introduction of myself. Also hosting this event with, at Ruskin School of Art, and also invisible audiences. I don't know how many of you are there, or like, but anyway, thank you so much for listening to this talk. Basically, I'm looking forward to have conversation with Jason and exchange with you audience. But before that, I like to give a kind of like a brief talk about two things. One is about briefly what happened during the 10 years since the wake of the disaster. And also in relationship with that, the basic program of the book I just finished, Radiation and Revolution. Anyway, the first thing I want to emphasize is that disaster is not over. The issues of dealing with the crippled reactors and the accumulating radioactive waste have not been solved. They are present. The contamination by small doses of radiation continues. And this is a very, very dark situation. But 10 years have been the process that the disaster is forgotten or buried under other spectacles and programs in the society of Japan. Now, especially that the corona pandemic captures the public mindset. But in fact, this is another point I want to emphasize, is that what we are really facing is not one disaster after another, but the synergy of increasing number of disasters. Of course, Fukushima pandemic, and in a larger picture, there's a rising global temperature and all other crises, along with political tensions rising everywhere. Anyway, the difference, I want to just point out the difference, very interesting and deadly points that I have to make about this. But the synergy of radiation contamination and pandemic is that while radiation contamination affects us little by little in a huge spatial expanse and long duration of time, pandemic affects our bodies immediately. The former unsettles our relationship with the land and the environment. Meanwhile, the latter forces us to discontinue our social interactions, which means that we have lost the trust of two fundamental relationalities that constitute our beings. That's the question of struggle, that question of anti-capitalist, anti-state struggles that I've been interested in. For this struggle, the main problematic is to create a new form of collective life for survival under such deadly condition, on top of the oppositional politics in the conventional sense of political ontology. Anyway, that said, I'd like to now talk about basic process of the past 10 years after the wake of the explosion. Anyway, as the book analyzes in detail, the Fukushima disaster had so far internalized 3 stages. It is like ripples expanding over the water from a stone thrown in, or explosive winds blowing from the epicenter of atomic blast. The first stage is that first 3 weeks after the three series of calamities of earthquake, tsunami, and nuclear explosion. This was like a 3 first weeks witnessed the state of emergency in the society of Japan. The everyday life was disrupted, and everything, all functions, especially northeastern part of Japan, including Tokyo metropolis, was the most infrastructure's function was deranged. And more than anything, due to the threat of Armageddon and the aftershocks of the earthquake, most of my friends who lived in the northeastern part of Japan, including Tokyo, fled to the west and stayed there for a few weeks until they found out that Armageddon would not happen in immediate future. But interestingly, some of them determined to remain for good. And this is a very interesting turning point of what Tokyo meant for many people. After the Japan's modern kind of restoration called Meiji Restoration, the Tokyo was really the center, and many of us who lived in Tokyo kind of did everything, thinking of their future and everything on the premise that Tokyo will last forever. So that's the kind of like ending of this premise. So in that sense, it was a big event. Also, like not only physical, but also mental context. And then the following 2 years after this 3 weeks was the moment of social unrest. The people took to the street to protest the government and TEPCO. TEPCO means the Tokyo Electric Power Company, for their responsibilities of this disaster, and also the lack of the aftercare for the sake of people's health under the influence of radiation fallouts. And but more fundamentally, I and many of my friends sense that the many people in Japan began to question the authenticity of the post-war regime of their capitalist nation state, because this is the fountainhead, the cause of this disaster, and despite the experience of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. During this period, people created various projects to protect their lives from radiation contamination. I analyzed this in detail in the book, so I won't get into this too much, but the projects such as monitoring of the radiation contamination, and they created the stations, and they developed the ways to exchange information, and also on top of this number of lawsuits related to the disaster and radiation, and also the street protests. And you know, like this, like as compared to the 60s, you know, uprising in Japan, these projects are not necessarily so spectacular. But this is nonetheless, this was a very important period for Japan's oppositional politics. And also, like another dimension that I would like to mention is that many of my Japanese friends who are active in the protest and other movements at that time consider their actions as part of the global uprising at that time taking place after the Arab Spring. So that was the very important moment for 2 years. But then next phase was that the dark return of the status quo that continues up to this day, that mostly like mass media and the public discourses shifted their attention from the calamity of the disaster to the more like a reconstruction of economy and industry. That was pretty much embodied by the project of the planning of the Tokyo Olympics that was originally calculated to take place in 2020, but it has their own another wave of problems by the pandemic. But anyway, in this period, like a really something like a really dark prospect began to surface. Another dark thing was like more like a fissures among the people began to stand out. The fissures between those who continue to express their concerns about the situation of the continuous disaster, and those who kind of prefer to, you know, follow the current of the shifting attention to reconstruction by ignoring this danger. And then like this, sometimes this discrepancy caused the decomposition of the relations in a very micro level, like in the families, friends, workplace, and activist community as well. And of course, schools and you know, local municipal governments. This was a really dark kind of like revelation to us. For most of us who had expected the radical change of society, which we believed to come after such a devastating disaster caused by the regime. That the lesson was really about like more like how invincible the resistance of global network of pro-nuclear regimes that they're sustaining, their intention to sustain nuclear power is so strong, and why how this power consists, how this power permeates our everyday life, and in the both global space and national space, and so on. So so this dark revelation has to do with the programs of the book, Radiation and Revolution. The book, so now I'd like to talk about the book a little bit, the background of the book, and then the chapters and programs a little bit. So that because today's talk, my hope is for those of the audience who haven't read the book, I'd like you to read the book, all of you. I'm hoping that. So I'd like to explain the background of the book. So the book is really based upon my experiences of visiting Japan and exchange with my friends under the influence of the disaster, and my thoughts, analysis that occurred during the 3 stages. So this is like a really kind of like influenced by the bitter lesson that despite this magnitude of the calamities, this state, the pro-nuclear state of capitalist nation state sustained so strongly. And why so? And in relationship with that, what a project to change the world might have to involve. And the whole book is kind of like reflecting my sense that it's fluctuating between the aspiration for radical change and the kind of depressing feeling that it's impossible. And also my kind of analytical kind of perspectives were largely influenced by 2 particular questions that were most frequently asked by especially foreign friends, Americans, Canadians, French, Greeks, Koreans. That kind of like these 2 questions were like in my mind throughout the process of the entire book. One question is like, why the hell did Japan introduce nuclear power after the genocidal experience of Hiroshima and Nagasaki? This, of course, has to do with the kind of like a fatal relationship between Japan and the US. And the second question is, why would not Japanese people rise up and oust the pro-nuclear government after this calamity? Anyway, so some part of the book, large part of the book is kind of like sometimes explicitly, sometimes implicitly seeking to answer these questions. And the book's the main part of the book consists of 4 chapters, which again like embody different spatio-temporalities of the Fukushima event and process that kind of like expanding like a ripple of waves. The chapter 1, Transmutation of Powers, narrates the disaster as event and the social process that follow in the 3 stages that I just described. This is kind of like very consists of heterogeneous anecdotes concerning post-nuclear disaster lives, like quotation of my statement of my friends, or the analysis of the newspaper clips, or a lot of data, and also like occurrences, the food, the change of diet, and shift of everyday life. Anyway, the transmutation or mutation of the everything after the disaster. And this kind of mishmash of this chapter kind of provides the subsequent chapters with raw materials for their theoretical analysis. And chapter 2 is entitled Catastrophic Nation. Is in a sense an attempt to answer the first question, why the hell did Japan introduce nuclear power after the experience of Hiroshima and Nagasaki? And this is really try to see Japan's geohistory in a sense. Geohistory because Japan is largely affected by the natural environment, including natural disasters such as earthquakes, tsunami, and it's like a kind of catastrophe provokes a radical renewal of the regime, and also the subsequent mutation of social processes. So this is the kind of like main focus is the temporality of like a post World War II. But nonetheless, what's behind is like entire kind of like formation of the nation of Japan as a kind of insular territory over an archipelago, which is more like the condition, the geopolitical condition of Japan is like how kind of like made into insular territory, and how this insular territory is conveniently provided the US for its global strategy to create an ideal client state after the war. And this regime, on the one hand, was realized unprecedented economic prosperity after the war. But this like a prosperity is basically sandwiched between the two calamities related to nuclear. One is weapon at Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and the other is electric power at Fukushima. So this prosperity, economic prosperity, is considered in this kind of double binded between the two phases of the nuclear, weapon and electric power. And also this chapter's another subject is Tokyo Metropolis, which is like a kind of like, I treated, the book treat this Tokyo as a kind of like a movement, both expansive and contractive, that absorbs and mobilizes tremendous amount of desire for the developments of the capitalist nation state. And along this like developments, of course, this nuclear power plants were installed across the earth-prone archipelago. And this much of earthquake as a kind of historical condition, and then like a nuclear power created this condition of the disaster. So anyway, the third chapter, chapter 3, called Apocalyptic Capitalism, is a kind of attempt to situate nuclear power in the global capitalism. This is an attempt to understand why the large number of nation states cannot give up nuclear production for both energy and weaponry. As many points out, nuclear power is not necessarily economical or clean or easy to produce. It's more like a really, really cumbersome machines produced. It's a kind of strange metaphor my friend actually told me, and it's very interesting. It's like something like walking your dog by using a tank. Tank, of course, this is a weapon tank. To create just to boil water, it creates tremendous cumbersome machines it's produce. And then by this cumbersome act, totally absurd act, it's kind of expand spatially in industrial sectors, mining, including mining, transportation, of course, energy, and also research and military. This kind of a network spreads across the planet. This is what I like to call, this is like a beyond one nation state. It is so-called like a kind of industry military complex, so-called industry military complex that stretches across the planet. And also temporarily, this kind of action, this nuclear action, nuclear production, grants it's like a zombie life of the nuclear capitalism through the endless demand for the management of its waste. Later, in the book, this waste issue is also analyzed as negative commons. Anyway, and in another dimension, this analysis of the global nuclear regime illuminates the theoretical juncture where the problematics of ousting capitalism and stopping nuclear power must merge in confrontation with the totalizing expansion of the world. And this world and earth is another kind of consideration in the book. This is the most kind of philosophical part of the book. This is the one kind of like ontology that the modern world has been relying on, the ontology of the world, which is kind of consisting of the human assembly of human societies, more concretely a relationship between the nation states. And the politics that's based upon this like expansive entity consisting of the conflictual relationship among nation states, the time of this like political ontology based upon the world is somehow felt like ending with these nuclear calamities and other like disasters that we are facing today. So this is a kind of like in a more conclusive part the book deals with. But anyway, the chapter 4, the following chapter is kind of like going back to the Japan. It's called the climate change of the struggle. This is basically compares the struggle of 1968 in Japan to those of the post-Fukushima present struggle via the phases of the shift in between. And this is really, I kind of like analyze in detail, like compared in comparison with the militancy, the 60s struggle, to more like kind of reproduction-based projects at present. And this is like, kind of like in the book, this is considered as the difference in a kind of difference of the shift in political ontology that is provoked by increasing catastrophes. This is like in the book, this is analyzed as from the unification or the dialectic synthesis of the world to the reverberations among the struggles within the planetary complexity. And this is like kind of like my main interest, my ultimate interest is the form of struggles and the form of everyday life, where they merge, what's happening to the people in Japan or across the people across the world under the influence of all these calamities that's basically caused by the endless development of the capitalist nation state. And this is considered like a kind of like a shift in the three kind of aspects of the shift, I guess, is that how the main horizon of the struggle expanded from the politics of the regime to various aspects of everyday reproduction, and from party politics to the creation of autonomy. And then like from the urban protests to the inhabitant struggles against the development in various regions. That's of course, we all know that, like Standing Rock native struggle to that, to in Japan, there's an example of Sanrizuka. Possibly we could also include Rojava's autonomous municipality. So anyway, so finally, this chapter, the last chapter of the book, is seeking to grasp the horizon of planetary revolution as an existential metamorphosis beyond regime change by a dispersion of the world constituted by capitalist nation states. Anyway, so the book is kind of like a very dark, and it's an attempt to find some kind of light within the really real dark apocalyptic darkness. Throughout the book, the analyses are staged mainly in Japan, but the whole thing epitomizes the global tendency that the politics of the world is breached, from which heterogeneous ontologies are gushing out as the political, what is political in this age. And so finally, I'm hoping with the book that, is that the purpose that I wrote the book is ultimately with a hope to share a few essential questions on revolution in the apocalypse with the reader. For instance, like, what is the world becoming of under the worsening conditions in all fronts? And what would the project to change it entail? Of course, this is a classical question, what needs to be done? But like the nuance is like, it's not necessarily a political line or strategy, but it includes like strategy, logistics, tactics, everything, ways of life and everything. And also like finally, I wanna ask, what is the happiness after the consumerist heaven is over? After all, like a Japanese nuclear regime developed hand in hand with the consumerist society there. So that's the question. So that's about my talk, and I'd like to move to maybe conversation with Jason and the audience.
Thank you so much, Sabu, for such a rich explication of the book and going further than you did in these pages. We'll have a conversation for a little while, and feel free to add questions into the chat box, which I'll share with Sabu. Maybe first, you touched on in the talk the responses of activists to Fukushima and their spatial displacement. And in the COVID-19 pandemic, certainly in the US and in Europe, many have looked to Asia to see how the future will look, whether that be over a short time of wearing masks or socially distancing, or kind of shifting ways of interacting in society. But this way, the way the activists responded to the disaster seems to point to a larger trend that we're also seeing right now. And in the talk, you referenced what you call in the book as those who go west, those who left the city and avoided any form of radiation contamination to set up organic farming and other forms. And it seems like there's a lot of parallel now with artists, cultural workers, and some who are leaving the city to go to rural areas and either work from there or engage in community struggles there, or maybe just beginning their lives there. And yet it's been now 10 years since 2011. And so one can look remarkably at how this distinction worked. And perhaps the second point is those who go north, who engaged directly in Tohoku or the area with both cleanup or helping the residents, maybe can be seen to those who stayed in the cities and recommitted to the cities, forming and working within structures of mutual aid and this. And so I was wondering how you might see 10 years on the experience of the activists that very much parallels the responses to COVID now.
Well, first of all, in response, in relationship with COVID situation in Fukushima, because in case of Japan, it's overlapping, but anyway, I may not be able to articulate precisely how to, compare or articulate the differences between the, influence of nuclear disaster over the activism and, COVID over the activism, but somehow maybe overlapping or something. But the basic basic framework is that as a big society, first of all, after the nuclear disaster, this split between the, of course, those who prioritize the business, economic interest, try to ignore the calamity, the magnitude of the calamity, and and the people who are concerned kind of sacrifice sometimes their economic activity or business and suspend it. In a sense, it's similar in America, America or elsewhere after the COVID. It's in case of America, also the fanaticism, appearance of fanaticism was that in Japan, a nationalist fanatics start encouraging to consume the food products from Fukushima as a heroic act. We have to support, we have to sacrifice our body to eat by eating the Fukushima food, because sustaining Fukushima economy is more important than our body, kind of. This is extreme. But also in America, also extreme, this a fascist impetus to kind of relying on the most cheapest and simplistic and vulgar interpretation of freedom, that I'm given divine privilege to continue my own business, no matter what happened to other people, kind of this freedom, American freedom, But then activist milieu, in Japan, that was a very important incident, was that the people who prioritized the issue of health under the influence of radiation, and people who believe continue to organize and support victims spirit, and those who go north, those who go west, those who go north, is kind of is a kind of a metaphor centered on the view from Tokyo. From Tokyo, north means Fukushima. So that means the people who kind of at the expense of their own kind of health risks under the influence of radiation, those who go to support the people who lost their homes and communities, business by the earthquake, tsunami, and in nuclear disaster, as a volunteer activities, and also radical labor organizers try to organize nuclear workers. And then people who kind of were engaged in more concerns of reproduction of everyday life. This involves a lot of feminist impetus and anti-nuke movement as well, to try to study the effects of radiation, measure the radiation levels in different cities, and create a monitoring center by themselves and stuff like that, along with this encouragement of creating communities outside these radiation contaminated zones. And this is overlapping with the idea of that creating a autonomous community outside economic zone influenced by Tokyo metropolis. So this is kind of like anti-capitalist community making and then protection of health was kind of overlapping. But problem was like this division became sometimes very nasty. Formally, like during the time of anti-globalization movements, the groups, these people are friends or comrades, but somehow split into like half or even more during this phase. But then like finally, like beginning from 2016, we kind of like, we mean some of us start to create a platform that these people who split apart join together again. Because we didn't believe in like a kind of like a finally either or choice. I think we believe both are important. You know, it's more like sensibility and belief, you know, should be like a multiple, you know. It's not like a one orientation is absolutely right, especially because dogmatic idea start calling it like a kind of people who protect everyday reproduction and create community as a kind of petit bourgeois civic movement, as opposed to like a real labor movement who's like a really organized nuclear workers, you know. But like we, you know, we are also confused for many years actually. But finally we realized like also the realization, another realization was that especially that, you know, main threat of that was like a small doses of radiation. It's not like a really explosive amount of radiation affecting you. Then it's clear and simple, but small doses of radiation is really nasty. This effects is like long lasting and diverges according to the age, body conditions, and the kind of nuclides. So it's really oftentimes court cases where like a precise scientific analysis required usually fails because it's very hard to prove this is caused by such and such nuclides when such and such person was affected by the responsibility of, you know. So anyway, this like, nonetheless, we have to, you know, strive to find out, but nonetheless, in a sensibility level, we cannot tell people like going to Fukushima is wrong because it's threatening your health, which means like a threatening also the encouraging the people who are living in radio affected zones. You know, the government policy to tie as many people as possible in these zones. If you go to Fukushima more, it would end up supporting this kind of government's project to reconstruct the economy and industry of Fukushima despite such and such danger of radiation levels. But, you know, nonetheless, this kind of logic maybe makes sense to a certain degree, but as a political project, we need both like organizing nuclear workers and support of the disaster victims, and also like, you know, protection of everyday life. So like, you know, like this idea, like you have to choose either or is kind of like terminated, ending around 2016, 2017. And along with it, people also begin to think more like a mobile kind of projects. Why not like, you know, create kind of like communities in the West, in the country, but also it's not like when you go there, it's forever you remain. But, you know, it's relationship in the urban struggles. More like in a connected, Japan is small country, you know, by the way. So it's not difficult to go back and forth. So more like a mobile type of ideas of like life, you know, shifting life forms. Yet like maybe like, you know, like after the, now like I'm talking about the COVID, what I observed in the around the COVID situation post-COVID situation in the US and Japan is like in the US, first of all, what's impressive is that the COVID and anti-police violence uprising coexisted. And somehow some group of people I know were doing both in a very, very, encouraging way. Like some friends in New York, suburb of New York, were like began doing a very important project to support people who do not have enough food to eat, like a food pantry project, mutual aid project, at the same time as the organizing protest actions. So this can go hand in hand, and somehow the role of uprising in the US was very important globally, because I know like my Japanese friends also were encouraged by this happening. Before, kind of like a priority was like not to meet people, not to go to social space. And so it's not like, to my understanding, because of the influence or encouragement, the US uprising, in Japan, like a big solidarity protest, solidarity action with Black Lives Matter took place. And probably most importantly, like immigrants start, their own protest. Like a Kurdish people somehow, some Kurdish immigrant was abused by the Tokyo Metropolitan Police. And their also protest was very important. Also around the same time as the US uprising, it took place. But again, like in case of Japan, it's like a really, Jason, I know you know as much as I do because you have been engaged in the scene in Japan, but the one of the important tendencies in Japan today is like a depopulation or aging population. And at the same time, increase of immigrants. And conventionally, Japan was considered as a one nation homogeneous group, but it's changing. And this change is very, very important. And this protest in Japan that involving a lot of foreigners, immigrants, started around the same time as the US uprising. That's also overlapping with COVID. These two things are very important. And I believe this is not like a shift of priority, like from protection of health to protest, but more like a collective awakening that we have to deal with two shit at the same time, kind of thing. So we need a few different actions, few different dimensions of being engaged. That's how I felt. But,
Yeah. tall task.
It's really easy, but some people are doing it, and I don't know how long it lasts, this kind of intensity, but that's a very encouraging thing to see.
And speaking about the materiality in a way, both of COVID, but also of Fukushima and radiation, you had a really important reading of what translates as the masterless object. And you describe a radiation as this masterless object, which comes from kind of TEPCO or the power plants owner's own characterization of radiation, but you get into a kind of deeper ontological relationship of the materiality and its effects. But in the book, you also develop this in relationship to the notion of care. And you write, radiation is deadly and invincible for all vital activities, but it should not be considered transcendent or treated as mere enemy. Instead, it must be dealt with through full passion, care, rigor, both technopolitically and onto-metaphysically, for us to live happy lives in the catastrophe.
Thank you. That's a very kind of important part of the book, and also like I'm thinking about this, also continuously thinking about it. And first of all, the concept of masterless object was came from our enemy, like TEPCO, the Tokyo Power Electric Company. They used it in order to disclaim their responsibility to cleaning up the radiation, insisting that the radionuclides are now a masterless object because these are now out of our nuclear facilities. It do not belong to us anymore. And it belongs to the environment itself. That's what they use this logic when they disclaim. And I was very inspired by this implication, but in a kind of inversive vector, that the masterless object is equal to the commons, in the sense that it is not owned by anybody. And also importantly, like commons also, some theorists develop commons, theory of commons at the same time as developing the theory of negative commons. So this was the main source of inspiration of the theory of commons and theory of negative commons. The concept of commons signifies various kinds of masterless, really masterless resources, techniques, and capacities that the community can share. But always, like, the productive activities based upon them would produce waste, which according to the principle of commons must be recycled within the metabolic system of the community that used them. This is in opposition, totally different from the cycle of capitalist production and consumption. That's wherein the waste are dumped into the ocean, like what Japanese government is claiming to have to do about nuclear waste, or many states and enterprises have been doing. They impose the waste on the people in peripheries, something like that. So this is the commons become negative when this kind of operation intervenes. And nuclear waste is the worst possible example of it. But on the other hand, as we all kind of beginning to realize that radioactivity in small doses as negative commons is already irreversible, because nuclear production never ceases and the waste accumulates little by little, very, very small amount, but pretty much we are living in a situation where the small doses of radioactivity expands in many, many places. That's why we need a special care for this, because it's irreversible. It's kind of and also this is a point probably we cannot rely on in the future at this moment, because we don't have a technology and technique and knowledge to treat it very well. So it's a kind of future prospect and hopes, but we have to gradually we have to be independent from the kind of a treatment of the government or the big corporation to store away the waste and create some way for us to deal with it. Of course, we need a tremendous project, tremendous efforts and technology to do that. But nonetheless, it's no longer nuclear waste the small doses of radiation can no longer treat it like a kind of evil god in a negative theology, but something we have to technically deal with it, either store away or in some way find a way to live with it. And so I just quote my book because it summarizes this section. what is radiation after all? Is it really an object? As the concept of masterless object, it's in Japanese called mushubutsu, uttered by TEPCO for self-exemption, revealed unwittingly. Radiation is less an object than a mode of existence or event, wherein split atoms of uranium are merging with the environment in nano dimension, following the complexity of planetary flows. It appears as chaos to our perception. That is, as a messy situation wherein our mind cannot make connection with the over-complex reality in which our bodies have substantially thrown. It is radiation that makes a reality that is already chaotic, deadly so. After Fukushima, the chaotic permeation of radioactive contamination in small doses has become an irreversible process with which more or less people must live. One will still have to see the extensiveness of what we must do and the potency of what we can do to outlive its effects. In this sense, the Fukushima nuclear disaster is far from over. It has just begun. And then it's not a kind of presentation of the pure formula or method to what needs to be done, but as a kind of suggestion, I quoted the book by Deleuze and Guattari, What is Philosophy, where they say philosophy, science, and art are three different ways of dealing with chaos. Dealing with chaos, our culture, we have all techniques to deal with chaos in different ontologies, and which means we need to, in order to deal with this, we need everything we have, all techniques and wisdoms we have as the weapons for survival and happiness. So more concretely, their suggestion, this is still I'm thinking, so I cannot explain how and how to conduct as a method, but they suggested something like we can grasp chaos as varieties in scientific recognition, conceptualize it as variations by philosophy, and sense it as varieties in art. And especially this, dealing with radiation is very much physical material fact, but at the same time, largely the matter of sensibility, because we are dealing with something chaotic and something virtual. Because as I implied a little before, effects of small doses of radiation cannot be really present or predict as a kind of hardcore material fact. So it's a really largely involves a matter of metaphysics. That's why I use the word technopolitically and ontometaphysically both. So
and this seems to be something really similar in a sense of COVID, in terms of the ontometaphysical effects, not only on the body, but on the mind. And thinking about the fact that both COVID and radiation are invisible, and the anxiety that this invisibility and potential omnipresence forms, and the sense of dislocation of residents in Fukushima, or as in our sense, our reaffirming of our location in our homes by not being able to leave. And the mental effects of radiation seem actually very similar to the mental effects of COVID. And it's very fascinating that the first juridical case where TEPCO was found as complacent with and in defiance of the law was for an elderly woman, as you know, an elderly woman who went back to her home and doused herself with gasoline and lit herself on fire.
Uh-huh.
And this was due to, the depression of and distress at being displaced from the radioactive fallout. And so the court, despite the fact that there was no kind of physical illness, took this mental illness as a direct effect and TEPCO was forced to pay compensation, and it was the first compensation for the disaster.
I see. I see. I see.
But yeah, and it seems like these parallels between the mental.
Mm-hmm. Also, this is where like I want to ask your project too, because you've been dealing with this dislocation and the closure of this zone, radioactive zone, in a very artistic project. So like how art intervenes is something I not very familiar with, and also you have been doing it. So like tell us of some of the discoveries that you made.
Well, I think the question of, it's so fascinating because I think we are both committed in different ways to a practice of life, and yet what can you do in a zone where there is no inhabited life in this way? And so how to deal not only with that space, but how to deal with a durational disaster. And in a way, when the disaster began, what was very clear is that it would go on for decades. Something that's just a little bit more unclear with COVID, although becoming more entrenched in our temporalities. And so how art and culture could function as a mnemonic, how could the existence of artwork inside a place which can't be accessed and works which can't be seen, how can that press upon our imaginary to force us to think of that space over a long period of time as wanting to know, for example, about these works as we recognize the artists. How does not only kind of art and culture function as a placeholder, which is what the residents who think it is, where the art is actually living there where they can't be living, but also the form of maintenance and life that comes around the object. And it's interesting that you speak about radiation as a negative commons, and yet having an artwork, for example, in someone's home, despite the fact that neither they nor us are living there, still enacts a different commons that binds us together. So we as artists and cultural workers continually go to the homes where many of the residents don't return to look after the structures or look after their gardens or report back on wild boar activities and this. And also the change in the artwork, so the materiality and tracing that over time. While trauma continues to be inside many of our collaborators and manifest itself in other ways, largely this is invisible, and yet the entropy on the works inside the zone kind of give a shape to the effects of time and to the effects of radiation to some degree. And thinking about representation in invisible catastrophes seems to be extremely, extremely critical. And I guess I'm kind of curious about these social formations and how we're implicated with them. And maybe I'll just ask one more question before opening it up to the audience. And just to say, we are on a slight delay. So if you do have a question, please feel free to put that in the chat now. My question is around your notion of metropolitan crowd, planetary crowd, and radioactive crowd. And I'm kind of curious what you see in the investment in the notion of the crowd and how you see these overlapping in different groups functioning together or against one another.
Okay. It's I didn't explain very well actually this part, but the idea of crowd derives from the Elias Canetti book, Crowd and Power, which describes the various modes of mass corporeality, kind of presenting a spectrum of like, mass corporeality being rebellious to subservient, it could go either way, And in my case, the crowd I wanted to use because of my empirical observation or almost my belief that the real impetus of struggle against power is initiated by the people rather than movement, theorist, or leader. Of course, like leading entities, are important, but they rather come after or follow the impetus to give the impetus a form and orient it toward a certain goal. In that sense, it's important, but there's a destiny that no movements last forever because it's essentially impossible to control crowd in the final instance. And so my attachment to this concept of crowd or mass corporeality, which can go either way, or it actually does, and it's uncontrollability and also it's a source of power. But three kinds of crowds I employed in the book is like embody to me like a 3 dimension of the popular struggles today under the calamities, disasters, and environmental mutation. That radioactive crowd signifies the people's struggle for survival and create happiness under the influence of not only radiation, but also all other hazardous objects affecting our environment in a kind of like autonomous way, as independently as possible from the government or project by big corporations. And the metropolitan crowd indicates the increasing protest and other oppositional projects across the world, which are themselves like becoming more and more visible in the sense like they are independent struggles with independent issues and independent forces. Nonetheless, in another level, they seem to kind of like reverberate, which is like, the concept of George Katsiafikas, the Eros effect describes very well. So this is the metropolitan crowd. And the planetary crowd is this exactly the kind of like, because of the Eros effect, some kind of like a power that's becoming to be visible, a power that is information in the precisely the process of uprising across the planet. Kind of this is to me the figure of species being beyond nationalities. That's a kind of project that terminated in the internationalism, which means association among the groups that based upon nations. The international, the second international was severed because of the groups in each nation determined to engage, participate in the wars in their own nation rather than continue to create international coalitions. And so this is like, to me, this 3 dimensions of crowds are kind of like, some are very realistic, struggle, but also some hopeful dimension of coalitions that may be information, hopefully. But I didn't explain this very in detail, but maybe a little bit vague there, but yeah.
A good excuse to get the book.
Yeah, I like to, somehow I feel like I'm not very good talker, so I like you to read the book. The book is much smarter than me and much more beautiful than me, so.
It's been absolutely wonderful. If there are any questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat box now. And maybe as a short preface, because there is a time delay, I was curious how you chose to bring in your biographical experience of growing up and moving to Tokyo and these forms of radical movements that you were around. It seems very interesting that this was the first time, at least, that I had come across in your writing, how you kind of situate your own biography. And I was wondering what role that took for you, putting that inside the volume.
Oh, you mean which part, like the struggle or the life, the struggle of the 60s, 70s, and today part, or like
Yeah.
my Tokyo life, and yeah. I mean, like I was really like, first of all, like born in Okayama, which is the countryside west, and then like moved to Tokyo with my mother when I was, you know, like young, very young, 5 or 6 or something. And then I saw the, you know, the first thing I saw was 60s uprisings, you know, in Tokyo. And also like avant-garde culture, like, you know, street theater, all sorts of things came at the same time as like kind of economic flourish. That was very influential for me. So Tokyo's street fight, like, you know, was very big impact on me. I thought that it's so great, so cool, you know, when I was little. And then that continued. And then like every year, like after I came to New York, like more like Japan's problem after the New Left movement was like, today probably I shouldn't get into too much, but it's like an internal strife that took place that began after the peak of the 60s movement was over. Like somehow the people, groups were ready to fight with the armed struggle with the government, kind of internalized this impetus. Conflict was internalized somehow. And there are many reasons that I can talk about. But anyway, this very discouraging type of event kind of made the following movement very weak in Japan. Like idea of changing the world in a full sense, revolution sounds really kind of like a dark because of this experience. So somehow the anti-authoritarian, horizontalist kind of militant struggle didn't happen so much in Japan afterward. But anyway, this issue exists. But on the other hand, important struggle took place in Japan after this spectacular street fight was over in Japan, you know, which is the inhabitant struggle, I would call it. Inhabitant struggle means like Sanrizuka farmer struggle, that the local communities of farmers fight against the state project to build a Narita airport, and Minamata anti-mercury poisoning struggle, like in a town in Kyushu, fishing town, like polluted the whole bay by this Chisso Corporation's chemical dumping in the ocean. These kind of struggles that last long time, like a life of community itself, generations, you know, like generations after generations, this kind of like rooted in the place, particular community, and struggle lasts not just one campaign or one protest, but last generation after generation. This kind of struggle is everywhere in the world, like indigenous struggles, and you know, so like this kind of struggle was, you know, not so spectacular, but continued, existed in many places in Japan. Actually, in fact, like many communities actually stopped the project of installing nuclear power plants. And, you know, so, but this was not very known. Like what we see mostly is a protest or a big coalition of urban coalition of anti-nuke movement or anti-war movement. But these local struggles are very invisible, but then like a very, very important. So my important struggle in Japan after the 60s, spectacular militancy, was shifted to like a lot of invisible local struggles. So I wanted to situate the post-Fukushima possibilities in extension with these like struggles that involves communities, reproduction of itself, generation after generation, and where like it's not, you know, like discouraged and finished. Even if one campaign is lost or another campaign is lost, they have to just continue. And I believe like in this situation of post-Fukushima, post-pandemic, most of the people on the planet are facing the same situation, that we must confront the struggles last almost like forever. It's not like ends, you know, liberation won't come like, you know, just like this. It's just like an eternal struggle is probably we are facing, you know, that kind of feeling. I don't know.
There's a question from Dungy Bookmore, who says, thanks to all for this great talk. I wonder if Sabu sees any parallels or divergences between radiation and the virus as invisible unfolding catastrophes, and how these relate to the emergent antagonisms in ways that are more diffuse than more obvious territory-based embodied struggles, as well as to mechanisms of biopolitical control.
Wow, that's a very, you know, important questions. I don't know if I can answer so well, but the first phase was what like the COVID and radiation, this invisibility. I think, you know, I don't know if I can answer this very well. The terms, the concepts, conceptual framework, these questions posed, but it's very interesting. Like my approach of these things is that this dark thing is also a kind of like a revelation for us, critical revelation of what our reality led by capitalist nation state consists of, kind of thing. And in that sense, both like kind of a, you know, like a moment of nuclear disaster and COVID expansion has a moment like kind of like a civilization, capitalist civilization touches upon the, you know, previously untouched zone of the planet, like earthquake and, you know, nuclear industry is crushed. But then like, and the COVID is also like dealt with, you know, like a food network or like a animal consumption, you know, like it's touched on the zone that previously hadn't been touched. Kind of like untouchable or like open in the can of worms type of situation, both related. And then, but then this is kind of like due to the basically unstoppable expansion of the world over the planetary body in some way. And, but then what's important is what to do with it. And this is the question of the political ontology that, you know, like this, the zone of the political, so-called political is expanding so much with this, you know, how to deal with this for survival and for happiness. Again, you know, that one cannot just live with bread and also, you know, healthy body. We need other things. And I don't know, maybe Jason, you could continue the answer.
No, the final part to the question that just came in is, and ultimately, what do these mean for ways of life built around autonomy? And I think you're certainly answering that question as well. And I think actually what becomes very interesting is, you know, when you're speaking about the bread and roses metaphor to some degree, how the roses, in this sense, like art and culture, is actually interested in the form of social reproduction and autonomy to some degree and sustainable ways of living as a form of practice. And so in a way, the bread and roses get merged into a single indefinable practice, at least as those practices that I think are most prescient in this contemporary moment.
Also, maybe like in case of Japan, like, I guess like, my friends, especially my friends, most of whom are kind of young precariat, like, they are like a difference of my generation and their generation, very stark. In my generation, still kind of like left or right, still there's a sustaining hope to become successful in the society, like successful professor or successful artist or, successful something. But they don't have it anymore. My friends, most of my friends in Japan or America also, they don't have it. More like they create a kind of like, because, they abandon different things, like a consumerist happiness, like get a lot of things, SUVs, house in the suburbs. They don't have that anymore. And also they don't, intend to have a happy family with, 2 children or something like that, that the nuclear family illusion is gone. And also like they are not interested in calling themselves Japanese or good American. And, so this is something like, of course, there is no perfectly autonomous life. I don't see anybody. But there are so many attempts across the world. My friends in France, Korea, Japan, US, people creating different ways to survive as much as possible outside consumerist society, create as much, little by little, more food by themselves. The relationship with children without having a family, nuclear family. Of course, it's difficult, but a lot of attempts exist. Small, but that's a big hope of mine. Because, my generation was not very successful doing that. And it's more like I'm learning from my younger friends of all these things. And none of them are perfect, but it's very, very encouraging because I believe in Japan, like a Fukushima nuclear disaster was a big sign that post-war ideal, like of consumerist society with nuclear family, successful business is over. And we have to take this opportunity affirmatively and create new happiness, something like that. Otherwise, it's too depressing. If not for this, there's just like a dark, everybody's victim, and so on.
Maybe as a final question, you raised at the end of your talk that the question of what is happiness, and I was wondering if you could kind of unfurl that a bit for us.
Me, that's like a more like I want to ask, I want to ask you all, like, because this is something like I'm learning, that, for instance, my mother's generation was, experienced the US bombing of Tokyo, like, in outside, after the poverty or like a devastation after World War II. So happy to see the consumerist culture coming in Japan, like TV, also like supermarket with air conditioner, all these things. And Tokyo Olympics of 1964, all these things are so exciting, And this thing is over. And these things, I don't know, the happiness of life, what is it? It's a very, this is itself is something like we are looking for, it's not, there's no clear answer, but also like individually very different, but at least I can tell this happiness of having a BMW suburban house, 5 dogs or like, and maybe some guns, and then apartment, condo in Manhattan and a house in the Catskills. And this is not happiness anymore, that's for sure. But then what, it's like that's what a lot of my young friends are trying. And, some are very successful, I think, and, but I don't know, there's no answer about the happiness, but more like I want to think of what, most of the people have been thinking as happiness is ending. That's what I want to more say. Especially I'm happy that my mother was dead, before nuclear disaster. So, I'm thinking from time to time, she's lucky that she didn't see it, because it was really like a counter to her ideal, and the kind of like consumerist society she felt so happy about, was concomitant with the nuclear development in Japan. So,
Well, thank you so much, and very much wonderful volume, Radiation and Revolution. And it's been a pleasure speaking with you, and thank you so much for your time and graciousness as always. And thank you all for joining late in the afternoon or evening, and hope to see you all again soon.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Jason.
Thanks.